You have no guitar and you need to buy one. You have three main choices: electric, acoustic, or classical. I'll give you my opinion right from the start. Best option for a beginner: basic classical with nylon strings. Right here. Basic classical with nylon strings. I'll give you what I feel are the two most important factors to consider, and then you can make a more informed decision for yourself. The first and most important factor I would consider is your threshold for physical pain in your fingertips when you start practicing and learning for the first time. This is a factor often overlooked by beginners because it's not something they would have experienced until after they started practicing, and maybe no one told them about this before they got their guitar. I'm surprised that I don't see it mentioned more by teachers. I definitely see it mentioned by learners, but usually only after they have already begun experiencing it. When you're a beginner, you're excited and you want to practice a lot, and you find your fingers in the same positions for unnaturally long periods of time. This wears down the skin on your fingertips and becomes painful to the point where you sometimes have to reduce your practice time as the pain becomes increasingly intolerable. The measure of this pain is based on two main factors: the differences in the material of the strings and how hard you need to press down on the strings to get the sound of the notes. On the acoustic and the classical guitar, the strings are positioned in a similar way, so the amount of pressure you need to apply to play notes is roughly similar. The difference is that the acoustic has steel strings, much more painful, and the classical has nylon strings, less painful. So in regard to the pain factor, I'm going with the classical over the acoustic every time. Now, don't get me wrong, you will still get this pain with the nylon, but much less so than with the steel strings. So acoustic out, classical in. Now, this is not as much a factor with the electric, because even though an electric also has steel strings, you usually don't have to press down as hard on the strings because they're positioned closer to the fretboard, which is this whole thing here. And you're also using an amplifier. That brings us to our second factor to consider: your budget. As I just mentioned, to get the sound you want from your electric, you typically need to use an amplifier. So that's one extra thing you need to buy. And generally speaking, an electric guitar by itself is typically more expensive than an acoustic or a classical. But at least the pain factor is reduced from the acoustic steel strings, right? Along with your wallet, a little bit more expensive. The acoustic and classical are usually around the same price point, but we already said in the first point why we would go with the classical. So speaking of needing extra things, this one is not a big deal, but again, because of the nature of the string material, electric and acoustic guitars, you usually have to play with a pick. Maybe acoustic not so much, but neither are as finger friendly as the good old classical. When I started learning, I always used to lose my picks, so I just started learning to play with my hands. No pick, no problem. So to summarize, classical over acoustic, less pain, more practice. Classical over electric, less expensive, less accessories. There you go. So it's worth mentioning here that there are two other main considerations people might bring to your attention, but I don't feel they are impactful enough to change from my recommendation of the classical. So I'll just address them briefly and end the day. Otherwise, this becomes a topic that could go on and become increasingly subjective and nuanced. So first is the practical difference with the classical versus the electric and acoustic related to the size of the neck, which is more or less reference to this part of the guitar here. And then also the spacing of the frets, which are these vertical bars. And what you can see here is that the spacing between these, well, I don't have anything to compare to, but in general, electric and acoustic have a slimmer neck and closer fret spacing. So the distance between these vertical bars are smaller. On a classical, the neck is thicker and a wider spacing between the frets. This sometimes can make it a little difficult if you have small hands or short fingers. So I could just say you could work on developing your flexibility. But even better, we can go one step further, and that is to tell you that you could actually just purchase a classical guitar that is a smaller size. You can get a 3/4 size or a half size. That exists. Problem solved. Moving on. The next one is actually the big kahuna, and the one I think that most people I think that most people actually use this point to guide their decision process, and that is considering what type of music they want to play. And that's because that is what they are familiar with, different types of music. The average person wouldn't be familiar with those 3 points I made earlier, right? But now you are. Nice. Good thing you decided to watch. But here's why this is actually not as important in guiding your choice, as surprising as that might seem. Unless you are projecting in your mind from the beginning that you're going to be the next Jimi Hendrix or Van Halen or Prince rocking wild solos on stage in the Super Bowl in front of millions of people, then let's bring it back to the basic beginner starting point. The things you should be learning are chords, chord transitioning and timing, strumming, and maybe some scales. And all of these you can do on a basic level as a beginner on any of these 3 types of guitar. So basing your choice on the type of music you want to play on that fact is not ideal. You will be best served by considering the first 2 or 3 points that I mentioned originally. Alright, I'll leave it there. To recap, classical over acoustic, less pain, more practice. Classical over electric, less expensive, less accessories. Now let's just talk about quickly where we want to buy our guitar. Now that we decided for the good old sweet baby right here. Yeah, man. Online or in the store. Personally, I would have to go with the music store for the obvious reasons that you can actually hold the guitar, see if it feels comfortable, if it's the right size, and so on. You can take your chances online, but you'll have the risks of damage during shipping or it not having the right feel or being the right size for you once you get it in your hands. So I'd definitely go with the music store option if you can. Now, I'm not recommending any particular brand, that's beyond the scope of my expertise. Just follow the recommendations I mentioned earlier and you will be fine. I will say, just to give you an idea of a price point to work with, I have seen classical guitars like this one on Amazon available for around 100 US, 125, maybe a little higher, a little lower. You can look around. Not sure how different the prices in a store might be. I can't tell you what my guitar is. This guitar is a Yamaha. It was my mother's and her brother's own before her. It's about 45 years old and works just fine still. The guitar you've seen me playing in other videos, I got that one at a flea market about 12 years ago. It's an Olinda and it's what's called a classical acoustic electric cutaway. It's pretty cool. It has the advantages of having nylon strings, the cutaway piece to play way down on the fretboard, and the big one is that it has the jack output like an electric or acoustics, some acoustics. that you can use to amplify. Very cool, but a little expensive, at least from about 250 US and upward on Amazon. I've seen it. Some as high as 350, 400, just going into, yeah, you don't need that. Don't worry about that. Yeah, go with this. If you have a little higher budget and you want to try the acoustic, classical, acoustic, electric, that's up to you. And if you do get that, make sure that you specify that it's a classical acoustic electric. Otherwise, you'll see a lot of acoustic electrics that are actually metal strings. All right. Last thing, special consideration for our friends who might be left-handed. If you're making a purchase online or in a store, you need to specify that you need a left-handed guitar. Because when you're left-handed, you usually feel more comfortable holding the guitar in this position, the opposite of a right-handed player. The problem here is that the strings are now upside down. The E bass string, boom, 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 boom here, the low E string, bass string, is on the bottom instead of the top. So just remember, if you're left-handed, that's something you need to consider and specify when you're making your purchase. All right, let me just say that if you already have an electric or a steel string acoustic, it doesn't mean you need to go out and get a classical guitar. You can still learn everything you need to on what you already have. Just be prepared for some serious pain, particularly if you're rocking that steel string acoustic. This is a lot of information. I hope it was helpful for you. This is a debatable topic, very subjective, very opinion based. So feel free to get into it in the comment section, but don't include me. I've already given my opinion and the reasons for it extensively. All right. If you're new here and you feel any vibes and you learn some cool stuff in this video, maybe share the love and support, jam the like and subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified when I post new videos. We move it forward ever, backward never. Blessings, respect. See you in the next video.